Well, hi, I'm Mary Fissell. I teach the history of medicine at Johns Hopkins. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you, especially to Connor and Sophie, but to all the other people who worked so hard to make it actually happen. Really appreciate that. So as I said, I'm a historian of medicine. My focus is usually on the pre-modern world, especially the 16th to the 18th centuries, although now I cover a much broader kind of waterfront. And as I talk, I will very often talk about pregnancy as related to women. I want to say, of course, today I would say pregnant people, not pregnant women, like absolutely. But in the historical past I'm dealing with, it is women who got pregnant and women who saw abortions. And understandings of those processes were profoundly shaped by binary gender relations. So I think it's important to call it out and use the word women, even though, again, it's not that there weren't non-binary people, there sure were, but the way that the politics was constructed was very much within that gender binary, and so that's why I use the word women in relation to that. So I've been working on the history of reproduction, well, for longer than I even knew it was a thing. I think I just started working in this area because as a feminist historian, it seemed to me this was an absolutely crucial topic that hadn't in some ways been considered to have a history. Like it was just a thing, right? We didn't have a history of it. In some ways I'm shaped by the sort of 1970s social history of writing histories of things that weren't presumed to be worth having a history of. I've sort of morphed to more cultural history, but that's sort of where I've come from. So it seemed to me that something that was that much at the heart of gender relations needed some proper historicizing. So I wrote a book called Vernacular Bodies, which is about the way in which ordinary people in Tudor Stuart England understood the processes of reproduction. I argued there that they understood this mysterious process happening deep inside the body with resources from the cultural and political landscape they lived through, which is to say, religious change in the Reformation, the violent political change in the Civil War, events that you would think would be really far removed from two seeds meeting in the womb, but in fact, gave people narratives to describe those events and help them to sort of work through those changes, I would argue. And I thought that was the last book I was going to write on the history of reproduction. Well, yes, we're now on book 3. So I'm just finishing a public-facing book on the very long history of abortion, antiquity to antibiotics. So that's like a couple of millennia. Obviously, in part, my interest was prompted by recent events in America. I started writing the book. Well, I was going to be on sabbatical, and the spring before the Dobbs decision that overturned the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, I started thinking harder about what I was going to do with my sabbatical, and decided that was what I was going to do, that we needed a long view. So there's a lot I can say about why I think taking that long of a view is valuable. It's risky. I mean, it means I'm skating on thin ice through most of the chapters. But I think the long view is really important. And here I'll just say, one of the things that the long view affords us, because there's tons of printed books out there about, Roe v. Wade on, but when you take this really, really long view, you can see that one of the things that characterizes the history of abortion are these very long, it's like cycles of toleration punctuated by sharp moments of repression. So often abortion has been something of a no. It's been illegal, or it's been a sin, or it's been not okay in some way. Not always, but often. But for most of that time, people look the other way. They don't ask questions. They don't notice that a belly went down. They as a deliberate thing, they don't look. They don't ask questions. And then we hit these moments of severe repression. For example, if we look at the Protestant Reformation, that's like a moment of repression. So in the Middle Ages, abortion was a sin. The Catholic Church, before the Reformation, there's only that. There's the Jewish faith, that's a whole other story we won't get into right now. But so abortion is a sin, but it doesn't end up in church or criminal courts. It's very rare. There are a few lovely stories and examples, but it's extremely rare. Mostly people don't ask questions, people don't care. In the Protestant Reformation, especially in the German-speaking lands, there's new laws in the 16th century that make abortion a really serious crime. Indeed, a capital crime in many places. A woman can be executed for getting an abortion, as well as the person who, if she had help, the provider of that abortion. So what's going on there? Like, why is this so bad all of a sudden? And it's largely because of a couple of interconnected factors, I think. First of all, the Protestant faith valued married life over celibacy. So back in the day, nuns and monks and priests were like the best of the best. Celibacy was connected to holiness. Protestant faith said no, the marital relationship, the holy household, in Lyndall Roper's words, is what is really important. So there's a valorization of married relations. What goes with that valorization is a criminalization of now illicit sex. So if you're having sex, but you're not in that marital unit, then you're really bad. And in an economic situation in which fewer people can get married, in which premarital sex with your fiance was the norm, and a lot of women got left literally holding a baby, there was a lot of factors that mitigated against only having sex once you were married. So there's considerable social pressures for women to have sex outside of marriage, but the law changes and women can only supposedly have sex within marriage. So it's a way for the state, the nascent, like emerging state, to wrest control from the church. To be like, oh, no, we're the moral arbiters here, this is what we say. So there's a bunch of factors that go into why this period of intense repression sort of erupts. And then it fades. These moments never last. In a way, the book is quite optimistic. Even our current moment, which is terrible, where I live, this won't last. It'll create untold miseries in the short run, but this too will pass because it never lasts. Like, when we look at the historical past, very rarely lasts. And I think the biggest takeaway of this long view is that the meanings of abortion have changed dramatically over time. I mean, you could think of it as a medical procedure that in some ways stayed remarkably constant for many, many centuries. But what that means is dramatically different. As I said, for the Protestant Reformation, it's a sign of illicit sex. It's those unmarried women having sex when they shouldn't. Like, that's what abortion means. It's like a pointer that says illicit sex here. But move to antebellum America, and the site of America's first anti-abortion movement, abortion's a problem there because it's upper middle class married women getting abortions that is really making them get upset. Not those single women anymore, it's married women, and that's problematic for a couple of reasons. First of all, men imagine, sorry, I have to do a little eye roll there. These men imagine that these married women are having adulterous affairs and that they're having abortions to cover up the adulterous affairs. Like, that's the narrative. Like, we don't see a lot of evidence provided, but that's the narrative. But also another darker theme is that they're concerned that these white, underlined white, upper middle class women are not having as many babies as they should. It taps into a deep strain of nativism in American politics that just runs incredibly deep all the way to this day. They're worried then less about Black people who are largely enslaved, not completely, there's plenty of free Blacks. They're more worried about those pesky Irish immigrants who have these large families, or in New England, sometimes it's French Canadian immigrants, or sometimes French and German. So it's worrying that the right women aren't having babies and they're using abortion in order to not have those babies. So the meaning of abortion in this context is totally different to what I had just talked about for the Protestant Reformation. Same thing, different meaning. I mean, on a larger scale, I think the way I'm seeing this has to do with the fact that I'm a cultural historian. I would say my method, if you could call it that, is a sort of anthropology of knowledge, that I've always been fascinated by the way that natural objects are understood both naturally and culturally. And I think gestation as a topic calls us to look at those in at least those ways, if not some other ways, to understand that sort of we're going to be telling stories about this vital process, and understanding those stories is a work of cultural history. That we're going to need to understand those stories in that way, as well as biologically, politically, and many other ways. I mean, I guess I also think about it in terms of the fact that even today, there's like so much that we don't understand about reproduction. Like we are living in, we think this, high watermark of medical science, but I think it's still true that medicine can't really explain what exactly makes labor start when it starts. Like they can tell you a lot about the mechanics after that, but they can't tell you why it starts when it starts. About a third of all infertility is not assigned to any diagnosable reason. So there's still all these places where modern medical science can't really help us understand what's going on. But at the same time, reproduction is absolutely fundamental to family formation, agriculture, the list could go on. And I sometimes think like we have to remember that it's true in the past, there's all these things they didn't know that they told interesting stories about how it happened. We're living in that same moment now. Medical science has good stories about the body, but 200 years from now, there'll be different stories. And there's still a lot of pieces that they can't explain to us. So I guess I'm always trying to sort of denaturalize those forms of natural knowledge. And reproduction, gestation is always already understood culturally then as now. Yesterday, I gave the example of in the ancient world, a fetus was not granted the kind of personhood that we casually grant today. Sometimes, especially in ancient Rome, the fetus was referred to as a hope. It didn't yet have personhood. In fact, I would say that kind of personhood was not ascribed to this new being, even right away after birth, because this was a world in which newborn infants could be exposed, which is a polite way of saying left to die. The father of the family decided if the infant was going to be kept. And if it wasn't, it was put out somewhere. Historians argue and argue. Was it put somewhere like racetracks? I mean, really. Sometimes they argue that the babies were left places they were likely to be picked up and adopted. And other people will say, no, this was like, they didn't want to see them again. They knew they were consigning them to die. They just didn't want to watch it. I don't think we'll ever know. I think the evidence is too weak. At the same time, this is a world in which abortion is known and widely practiced, especially in ancient Greece. In fact, pennyroyal that we already heard about, very common, used extensively and referred to in the Hippocratic literature. So a fetus did not have the kind of meanings that it was to later have. Today, of course, family photo albums start with an ultrasound. Womb names give way to birth names, and anti-abortion activists rant on about innocent unborn lives. The meaning of that fetus, which is biologically the same, is completely different culturally. So I want to sort of round out what I'm saying here by suggesting that I'm going to put in a plug for pre-modern history, for the long view. I sometimes think that looking at the very distant past, with all of its strangeness, all of its inexplicable moments, sometimes can jolt us into recognizing aspects of the present which we might have otherwise taken for granted. So the long view can give us those moments of surprised lack of recognition that I think are the historian's tool in, stock and trade of a tool that can help us interrogate both the present and the past. Thank you.